All right, next lesson. And I'm going to try and move along quickly here because there's so many great things to talk about in this book, and we only have a little bit of time. Something that stood out to me is the concept of talking about the top 5 regrets of the dying. Daniel, what do folks need to know about what people who are dying regret?
So I have, if we look at every faith tradition, every wisdom tradition through time, Stoicism gets a lot of play, I think, right now because of the impact of Ryan Holiday and others. And I've got my little, memento mori bracelet on here that I look at every day. But in every sort of wisdom tradition throughout time, there's been this learning that by focusing on the finitude, by focusing on the fact that tomorrow is not promised, that life is not forever, that can actually be a real source of energy. And I mean, your own story, right? Your own health scare and your own story, I think, is evidence of that. But there was worked on by this Australian palliative care nurse named Bronnie Ware, and she talks about the top 5 regrets of the dying. And what's fascinating is how disconnected they are from what we spend most of our lives worrying about. Like if you did a pie chart of where you spend your day, it would be, a lot of work, like a lot of worrying about money and a lot of worrying about work. If yours looks very much like mine, and I think most folks do. And look, there's some real lifeness to that. There's some veracity to that focus because life is expensive and increasingly so. Um, but when people are dying, right, and they're looking back on their lives with 2020 hindsight, work only comes up once, and it's I wish I had worked less, you know. And so I think there's wisdom in I used to be a psychotherapist, and in the psychotherapeutic literature there's something known as an existential boundary experience. And it's these moments where the reality of death is very close. I was sitting in this room when my wife came down. I was pulling my hair out over an Excel spreadsheet that I was very angry at, right? And I couldn't get this model to work for work, and I was very frustrated about it. And my wife came through that door right there and told me that my sister-in-law was going to die. My sister-in-law, who had had cancer, was now, incurable and on the verge of death. And in that moment, in that existential boundary experience, that Excel spreadsheet felt very small, right? Like that spreadsheet felt very insignificant. And we need to have those moments and sort of rent those moments by reading the works of someone like Bronnie Ware before it's too late, like before we get our own diagnosis. So I think there's a ton of wisdom in contemplating the end of life and living today as if tomorrow isn't guaranteed, because it's not.
Daniel, one thing I experienced is I didn't, I thought I was heading down a bad road. It did not look great at all. I got to the other side. Of course, I'm perfectly healthy today and I'm very blessed. After I got healthy, I was encouraged by some folks to share my stories. So maybe it could be inspirational to somebody else who's struggling. I did. In it, I talked about some of the lessons I've learned. So that was just over a year ago. This morning, I was so mad at OneNote. You mentioned Excel because I couldn't get OneNote to do what I wanted it to do in prepping for this podcast. The number of things that I've gotten upset about over the previous 6 months, a year ago, I would have said, I'll never get mad at that stuff again. What happens when you have, why does that happen? How can somebody go through an experience where they go, okay, this is it. The game ended sooner than I thought. Oh, I got to get out of jail card free. And then I'm right back to where I was.
Well, life, we're wired for immediacy, and we're wired to. I mean, we're wired for immediacy. We're wired for right now, and we're wired for instant gratification, right? Well, and instant anger too. But we're wired to be way too locked in on the pleasure or the grievance of a moment in that moment, and not to think long term. So I think it takes a constant reminder. I mean, again, my daughter made me this bracelet, and it's just a simple little memento mori thing, and it's a small thing, but I look at it every day and go, hey, this isn't forever. Like, am I putting first things first? And it's an imperfect process, but we cannot let ourselves just live an 80-year existence mired in the smallness of every passing moment. We've got to consider the bigger picture, to step back from time to time, consider what truly matters, and try and make sure that we're at least, steering our rudder in that direction, and understanding that that's a constant process of reassessment and reevaluation.
So what I'm hearing from you, the key is to be intentional about remembering,
Yeah,
not get
intentional
stuck
about
in your day to
remembering,
day. Yeah.
and constant, right?
Yep.
Because the little stuff will take over.